Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Ukraine says it struck the base of a Russian missile brigade it claims is behind the deadly attack on Sumy. Sudan's civil war enters its third year as aid agencies say it has caused the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. And the retrial of the disgraced movie mogul Harvey Weinstein begins in New York City today. Now to our top story today. Ukraine says it struck the base of a Russian missile brigade it claims is behind the deadly attack on Sumy. Meanwhile, President Trump has blamed Volodymyr Zelensky for starting the war with Russia. His comments come after a massive Russian attack killed 35 people and injured 117 others in Ukraine. The US president said the Ukrainian leader shared the blame along with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Let's take a look.
But that's a war that should have never been allowed to start. And Biden could have stopped it. And Zelensky could have stopped it, and Putin should have never started it. Everybody's to blame. When you start a war, you got to know that you can win the war, right? You don't start a war against somebody that's 20 times your size and then hope that people give you some missiles. You take a look at Putin. I'm not saying anybody's an angel, but I will tell you, I went 4 years and it wasn't even a question. He would never, and I told him, don't do it. You're not going to do it. And it was the apple of his eye, but there was no way that he would have done it.
For more on this, I'm joined by Ukrainian MP Dr. Oleksandr Merezhko and chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Ukrainian Parliament. Thank you for joining me, Doctor. What do you make of President Donald Trump's comments?
Well, first of all, let's look at the facts. And the fact is that the Russian aggression, Russian war against Ukraine started in the year 2014 with the illegal occupation and attempt to annex Crimea. I remind you, 2014, under administration of Obama, and the war continued during the administration of President Trump. So he cannot be blamed for this war. He could stop it because it was continuing during his presidency, but he didn't do it. So my idea is very simple. No one can be blamed for this war except for Putin and Russia, because under international law, in accordance with the UN Charter and laws of war, the act of aggression against Ukraine was committed by Russia. And Ukraine is the victim of this aggression. So no one can be blamed except for Putin and Russia.
Russia says it's not easy to agree Ukraine peace deal with the US. Is this time for Donald Trump to start putting maximum pressure on President Putin?
Exactly. This is exactly what we expect from President Trump, to deliver on his promise, because he said very clearly and distinctly that he's putting forward this ceasefire proposal, and if someone disagrees, if someone rejects this peace proposal, this ceasefire proposal, he will have to deal with serious consequences. Ukraine has agreed absolutely unconditionally both times when this ceasefire was proposed by President Trump. First, full-fledged ceasefire, second time partial ceasefire. We had agreed without any additional demands or any conditions whatsoever. What happened with Russia and with Putin? Both times, these proposals have been rejected by Putin. So we expect Trump to deliver his promise to punish Putin by imposing more sanctions against Russia, by providing more military support for Ukraine.
Russia currently controls a little under 1/5 of Ukraine. Is Zelensky prepared to hand over territory in order to agree a peace deal?
This is absolutely out of the question for a number of reasons. First of all, it's not possible from the point of view of our constitution. Any Ukrainian government or any president who would do it would be immediately deposed. That's why it's absolutely out of the question. It's also politically impossible because Ukrainian people would never agree to make such territorial concessions. It's morally impossible. It's also against principles of international law and the UN Charter.
Today, Zelensky has announced a Black Sea security meeting will be happening next week with Ukrainian, British, French and Turkish representatives. It's been a real key battleground in the war. Is this a step forward to achieving a ceasefire?
Well, everything depends on Russia because Ukraine has agreed to ceasefire, but Putin is not interested in ceasefire. With regard to Black Sea region, Russia has lost dominance in the Black Sea. And Ukraine has destroyed Russian flagship Moscow, which is very symbolic. So the question is whether Putin will agree to such kind of ceasefire. I strongly doubt it because Putin has proved many times, first of all, that he never comply with any agreements reached. And second, that he is not interested in peace or ceasefire because he is afraid that he can lose power in Russia.
I just want to ask you one final question, Doctor, on what life is like currently in Ukraine as this war does continue.
We have already entered the fourth year of war, and you can imagine how difficult it is for Ukrainian people, for Ukrainian army to continue to fight, being outgunned and outnumbered. But we have no other choice because we understand no matter how tired we are, we cannot afford to stop fighting because if we do, we'll be eliminated, we'll be destroyed as a state, as a nation. So we have no choice but to continue to be defiant and continue to fight until we restore our territorial integrity.
Ukrainian MP Dr. Oleksandr Merezhko, thank you so much for joining me on the show. Appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
We can now go to Moscow and our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova. Dasha, thank you for joining me. Ukraine says it struck the Russian brigade behind the Sumy attack whilst also carrying out a drone attack in Kursk. What is the latest on this front?
Well, we do know from the Russian Ministry of Defense that indeed the Kursk region in Russia has come under a massive attack by the Ukrainian drones. According to the MOD, 109 drones have been intercepted, but the governor of the region, the acting governor, Alexander Weisntein, has said that that was a very cynical and indeed destructive attack by the Ukrainian drones against the region. We know that at least one civilian has been killed, another 9 have been injured. We know that there were more than 36 apartments in the city that have been destroyed because of these attacks. Several houses, multi-story buildings, and several cars have also been burned because of this attack. We're also hearing from the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs saying that this attack has to be condemned by the international community. And Moscow also says that this attack comes against the backdrop of Ukraine, saying that they are willing to have peace in this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And obviously in Moscow there is lots and lots of criticism against this attack against the Kursk region. And we keep hearing throughout the day that there have been more drones intercepted over the region over the past hours. Also, Moscow has been very clear on its strike against Sumy, suggesting that it was the strike against the Ukrainian military. 60 military, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, have been eliminated in this strike, and Moscow is accusing Ukraine of using civilians as the human shield.
One of Russia's top diplomats has said it's not easy to agree a peace deal with the US, but has actually commended Trump for trying to solve the problem. What does Russia want Trump to do next?
That's right. In Russia, there is a very strong perspective across the political spectrum that what is happening at this stage is there is an attempt by the new American administration to understand the real causes, the real problems behind this conflict in Ukraine. Moscow says that it is very different from the previous approach. They do know this difference. And the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has most recently been saying that it is indeed very difficult to agree on the peaceful negotiated settlement for the Ukraine conflict because of the very reasons of this conflict. However, we also have heard the Kremlin saying that there is the political will on both sides in Moscow and in Washington, and it is this political will that is basically giving hope that this solution, this negotiated settlement could be found. But we're also hearing from the Kremlin that despite all of those good contacts that have been meaningful and had lots of good positive signals, there is still no concrete outline for any negotiated settlement for the conflict in Ukraine to this date.
Meanwhile, Sergei Lavrov has described European leaders as a frenzy. Why has he used this word? Why is he saying this?
Well, it does seem that in Moscow, the political narrative has shifted tremendously, with Moscow suggesting that there is a stark difference between how the United States and how European Union countries are addressing the issue of Ukraine and, in general, their relationship with Moscow. The suggestion in Russia is that the European countries are not interested in finding a negotiated settlement. What they are doing from the Moscow's perspective is they are pushing Ukraine to continue the fighting. And that does look frenzy to Moscow because the very idea that Russia is located on the same continent as the European countries as well as Ukraine only allows Russia to say that there has to be a negotiated settlement, there has to be the political will to find the root causes to eliminate this conflict. But instead, Moscow is saying that even though there has been the change in tone in Washington, the European countries are not interested, and therefore we are hearing such stark comments by the Russian politicians.
Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow, thank you for joining me. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. US Vice President J.D. Vance has said there is a good chance a trade deal could be reached with the UK. He added the reciprocal relationship between the US and the UK gives Britain an advantage when it comes to negotiating new trade arrangements over other European countries. According to reports, a second round of nuclear talks between the United States and Iran will be held in Rome. Iran and the US said they held positive and constructive talks in Oman on Saturday and agreed to reconvene this week. However, earlier today, Iran insisted the next round of talks would be held in Oman again. A sandstorm in Iraq has suspended flights, triggered power outages, and left more than 1,000 people with breathing problems. Footage shared online showed areas cloaked in a thick orange haze. Dust storms are common in Iraq, but some experts believe they are becoming even more frequent, and that is due to climate change. Sudan's civil war began exactly 2 years ago today, causing what aid agencies have described as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. The UK is promising an extra $159 million worth of food and medical assistance. Meanwhile, a high-level international conference has taken place in London today. One of its hosts is the UK Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. He said its aim was to find a pathway to peace. Let's take a look.
Very simply, we have got to persuade the warring parties to protect civilians, to let aid in and across the country, and to put peace first. But the biggest obstacle is not a lack of funding or texts at the United Nations. It's a lack of political will. With over 4 million refugees having fled the country and instability spreading far beyond Sudan's borders, it's also strategically wrong to forget Sudan. And that's why, as Foreign Secretary, I refuse to turn away.
I'm now joined by Al Arabiya's geopolitical security analyst, Riad Kahwahji. Riad, great to have you on the show. The war in Sudan erupted in April 2023. What is the situation on the ground 2 years on?
Well, 2 years on, we have today some progress made by the Sudanese army. As we know, the fighting is between the Sudanese army, the armed forces, and a militia, a paramilitary force that is known as the Rapid Security Force, the RSF. These two groups have been fighting the past 2 years. Over the past few months, we saw the army dominating and managing to capture a good chunk of the country, or recapture it, reaching the capital Khartoum, liberating the whole area, and even part of the neighboring Omdurman area. So the RSF is very much now entrenched in this south and the southwestern part of the country, especially in the Darfur province. The war has, as you've noted, inflicted really heavy losses. The casualties, you're talking above 100,000 killed. They don't have exact numbers because of the situation. There's many people missing. You have 14 million people displaced because of this war. That's why it's such a big tragedy down there.
So, Riad, as you just sort of outlined to me, the UN also says the war in Sudan has created the largest humanitarian crisis and displacement crisis, as you just explained. Today, the European Union and Britain have pledged more aid to Sudan. Do you think this is anywhere enough money to help the people right now in the country?
There will never be enough money so long as the fighting is continuing. This war has to come to an end so that the killing and the additional destruction and disaster that is being inflicted on the whole nation comes to an end, because right now organizations would say, okay, we need that much to deal with what we have right now. But tomorrow, with additional fighting, additional people being displaced and killed and so forth, you're going to need more and more. So it will never be enough until this war comes to an end.
Is there any talks currently going on about a ceasefire deal or an end to the war? Is there any prospects?
Unfortunately, in conflicts, you start seeing real progress in ending it when both sides realize and conclude that continuing the fighting will not bring them any gains. So long as both sides believe that they can come out victorious from the fighting, that the military option is their best option, the chances of any progress on the diplomatic side would be very low. And this is what the scenario we have at the moment in Sudan. Both sides are still at it, believing that they can achieve a victory. Today we have the RSF making a big move in the Darfur area on the city that on the northern side of Darfur, which is still under the control of the army, trying to push them out of this province, which indicates that the RSF still believes that they can win this war, while the army now feels jubilant that made all these big advances in the past few months, also again is refusing to make any concessions and go into negotiations.
Riad, why has the conflict in Sudan not gained as much media attention as the wars between Russia and Ukraine and Israel and Hamas?
Well, it got the attention in the in the region. You know, if you go to Africa today and talk to African leaders, you will hear them voice a concern about the war in Sudan. However, if you go to the bigger picture, which is the world, the global conflicts today, the center of gravity is still very much in the north, on the western side. So we have a war on the European continent, which is a more powerful, or very rich continent, and it has the Russia and the US both involved. All the big powers are concerned about this conflict, and that's taking a lot of attention away. And of course, when it comes to the Middle East region, what has been happening in Gaza and with the Israeli wars in Lebanon and so forth also took away a lot of attention of what's been happening in Sudan. Unfortunately, we have a lot of war conflicts, a lot of military conflicts happening on so many places. The attention will always go first to, the northern part of the world.
Yeah, but as we said, it's been a big humanitarian crisis, and I guess as it enters its next year, people are highlighting it.
People are highlighting it. Also, the atrocities that's happening alongside, like today we have the Secretary General of the UN pointing out the rape being used as a primary weapon, especially on the western provinces in Darfur. And this is not something new. It has happened in the previous conflicts in the Darfur area, where tribes down there have used it as a weapon against one another. This is such a tragic, atrocious thing to be happening today. And it is, as you pointed out, it's not getting the attention it needs because of the other conflicts happening all over the world today.
Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Arabiya's geopolitical security analyst, Riad Kahwahji. Always great to have you in the studio. Thank you very much. Let's take another look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Mark Zuckerberg has taken to the stand to defend his company Meta against a landmark antitrust trial. The testimony is part of a case brought by the Federal Trade Commission in 2020 during the final days of the first Trump administration. Meta, formerly called Facebook, is facing a legal battle over a supposedly unfair market domination with the addition of both Instagram and WhatsApp. El Salvador will not return Kilmar Abrigo Garcia, who was deported to his home country by the US government and is currently being held in a notorious mega prison. El Salvador's president made the comments during a meeting with Trump at the White House yesterday. Last week, the US Supreme Court ruled that the Trump administration must facilitate the return of Mr. Garcia, who was granted protection from deportation by a court in 2019. Deadly storms and floods in Europe affected more than 410,000 people last year as the continent faced the most widespread floods for more than a decade. Scientists say climate change, driven by the use of fossil fuels, is resulting in more torrential rain and also extreme weather. The flooding killed at least 335 people. The jury selection for the retrial of the disgraced movie mogul Harvey Weinstein begins in New York City today. It comes 5 years after the film producer was sentenced to 23 years in prison for rape and sexual assault, a sentence that was overturned by an appeals court last year. New York's highest court has ordered a new trial after finding that his original one in 2020 was tainted by improper rulings and prejudicial testimony. Regardless of the eventual verdict, Weinstein will remain in prison after being convicted of a separate charge of rape. Ahead of today's retrial, I spoke to one of Weinstein's former assistants, Rowena Chiu. She famously broke her silence about allegations of attempted rape against her former boss in an article for the New York Times back in 2019. a claim Weinstein does deny. I asked her how she felt about seeing him back in court and, as a hashtag #MeToo activist, what change she wants to see in the future.
I would say that I think the wheels of justice grind extremely slowly. When the first verdict came out in 2020, in early 2020, frankly, it was a shock, I think, to many Weinstein survivors. I think many of us never thought we would see the day where Harvey was in court at all, let alone convicted of a crime as serious as rape. And so I think I am grateful that the retrial is able to take place. It is not without huge amounts of pain and trauma and cost. All of the women involved, of course, those that testify are bearing the greatest cost. But the legal system, again, has had to come into the fray because of the legal technicalities that caused the original verdict to be overturned. But I think that the fact that the retrial is happening so many years later is really a testament to the determination of the very many women and the lawyers who supported them, who spoke out on behalf of the Me Too movement and still continue this day to speak out against injustice.
As a Me Too activist, what do you want to see change in the future? Because obviously I felt the Me Too movement gained a lot of momentum. Harvey Weinstein was at the forefront of that. However, it seems to have slipped back a little bit. Am I right in that analysis?
I would say this. I would say the Me Too movement, when it ignited in 2017, was very much part of the news headlines. But behind the news headlines and behind the media, really the real change was happening in terms of legal reform and policy reform. And I think that all takes time. And I think that the efforts around legal reform and policy reform are ongoing, regardless of whether the Me Too movement is in the headlines, fades from the headlines, or resurges in the headlines, as it has done over the retrial. And so whilst media was obviously deeply important in igniting the movement itself, with the original article in the New York Times and the New Yorker and so on, the media played an instrumental role. I think it is not solely the media that comprises all of the Me Too movement. And so when people say to me they feel like it has slipped a little, to use your language, it has only slipped a little in terms of media attention. But I think media attention comes and goes. What really matters is the long-term legal reform and policy reform, so that we can have laws in place and policies in place to protect the vulnerable and protect women who are vulnerable to sexual assault. And I think that work still continues. It's not glamorous. It doesn't always make the news headlines, but that is where we want real change to take place.
That was former assistant of Harvey Weinstein, Rowena Chiu, there speaking to us. Let's take a look at the top business news now. Nissan will cut Japanese production of its top-selling US model, the Rogue SUV, over May and July. This is the latest global automaker to alter manufacturing plans in response to new US import tariffs. America is Nissan's top market, accounting for more than a quarter of the vehicles it sold last year, with many of those made in Japan and also in Mexico. JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon has sold about $31.5 million worth of the bank shares. According to a regulatory filing, Dimon also offloaded some shares last year in his first such sale since taking over the top role in 2005. JP Morgan is the largest lender in America. Turning to the sports news now. Newcastle manager Eddie Howe will return to the club when he is 100% ready, according to assistant manager Jason Tindall. Howe was admitted to hospital with pneumonia on Friday and has missed his side's 4-1 win against Manchester United on Sunday. He will also miss the next two games against Crystal Palace and Aston Villa. And finally, US Vice President J.D. Vance nearly dropped the College Football National Championship trophy while trying to lift it at the White House. Vance didn't appear to realize that the top of the trophy is detachable from its base during a photo op with the Ohio State Buckeyes football team on the South Lawn. The footage that's gone viral on social media shows Vance dropping the trophy before picking it up off the ground. We can now go back to Harvey Weinstein's retrial, and I'm joined by correspondent Mitch McCann, who is in New York. Mitch, thank you for joining us. Mitch, what is happening today?
Well, nice to be with you from New York. Harvey Weinstein is back in court today for the beginning of what is his third trial for sexual crimes, having already been convicted in 2020 here in New York and then 2 years later in California. This is a retrial of the 2020 case and will involve the allegations of 3 different women. Now, Mr. Weinstein is being tried on charges of a first-degree criminal sexual act and a third-degree rape charge based on complaints from a former TV production assistant and a woman described as an aspiring actress. Both women testified in the first trial. However, in this new trial, the third trial, Harvey Weinstein is also charged with sexually assaulting another woman, a third woman, in a Manhattan hotel in 2006. Now, prosecutors say they have known this woman for some time, but she is now ready to come forward. So there will be the 2 women we've heard from in the 2020 trial, and now there'll be a separate charge as well. Jury selection, which began today, it could last 4 days, and opening statements are expected to begin early next week.
Mitch, Weinstein has always denied that he raped or sexually assaulted anyone. What cases are being retrialed and why?
Yeah, well, only one case has been tried, but for context here, as I mentioned, there are 2 cases to consider. The first one is the case in New York where he was convicted in 2020. He was sentenced to 23 years in prison. The second is the case in California where he was also convicted on different charges and sentenced to 16 years in prison. Now, the New York case was overturned by an appeals court last April in a 4-3 decision by the judges. They ruled that Harvey Weinstein was not given a fair trial in 2020 because prosecutors called on witnesses who claimed that Harvey Weinstein had assaulted them, but there was no physical evidence by those examples, and those people weren't actually part of the case that was being heard. So in the end, the appeals court ordered a new trial, which leads us to today. Harvey Weinstein, as you mentioned, has always maintained his innocence, and he's wanted this trial to come sooner rather than later in the hope that he can be freed. It's also important to note he's also challenging or he's appealing his conviction in California.
Correspondent Mitch McCann in New York for us. Thank you for joining me. Now, turning to some sports news, and a victory for Saudi Arabia's under-17 national team means they have made it to the semi-finals of the AFC Under-17 Asian Cup. It's a major milestone for the kingdom's youth development. Making the semi-finals puts Saudi Arabia firmly on the map in this age group, particularly as it knocked out 4-time winner and also reigning champion Japan in the quarter-final after a penalty shootout. And the bigger prize is arguably a spot in the FIFA Under-17 World Cup in Qatar this November. For more on this, I'm joined from sports journalist and editor Mark Lomas. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. So how significant is this achievement in reaching the AFC Asian Cup semi-finals and the FIFA Under-17 World Cup?
Yeah, it's a major achievement for the Saudi team led by Brazilian Mario Jorge. Mainly because it's been so long, I think, since Saudi Arabia competed at the latter stages of this tournament and competed on the world stage as well at this age group. So yeah, the result against Japan was a big one, as you mentioned, because they were champions. They're 4-time winners. It was a very, very dramatic penalty shootout victory, and means that Saudi Arabia now face South Korea in the semi-finals on Thursday. But it's been a long time. It's been since 1992 that Saudi Arabia made it to the semi-finals of the Under-17 Asian Cup. So it just shows that this age group, these young players, are on a good, positive path.
A penalty shootout is always stressful, but why is there now more interest in how Saudi Arabia's youth teams are performing in international competitions?
Yeah, obviously, because Saudi Arabia is now, the kingdom's now hosting the 2034 FIFA World Cup, a lot of these players now who are coming through at youth level, they could be the players who are the heroes for Saudi Arabia in 2034. So the development of the teams at under 17 level, under 20 level are being monitored a lot more closely. But there's so much positive news because the under 20 team also managed to reach the final of the under 20 Asian Cup in China last month before narrowly losing to Australia. They're also playing at FIFA Under 20 World Cup later this year. Now we have the Under 17s team as well, also playing at the FIFA Under 17s World Cup. It's giving these players valuable experience against the absolute best in the world, and they're going to need that if they're going to be competitive at the 2034 FIFA World Cup.
Can the Under 17s go one better than the Under 20s and maybe possibly win this?
It's gonna be tough. So South Korea have got an excellent team as well, and then even if they get through South Korea in that semi-final, there's the likelihood that they're going to be playing against Uzbekistan in the final. They play North Korea in the other semi-final. Uzbekistan beat Saudi Arabia 3-0 in the final group stage game, so there's a little bit of a rivalry there. So it's going to be a tough test, but yeah, Mario George's side and his players, I'm sure they'll give it their all.
Mark, and this is all positive in light of Saudi hosting the World Cup, of course, in 2034. What's the latest?
Yeah, well, obviously, you know, as I said, every move that a Saudi team makes, whether it's the national team trying to qualify for the 2026 World Cup, whether it's the youth teams developing, the players coming through both in the Saudi Pro League and for the national team, it's all eyes on Saudi Arabia at the moment. I know that the men's and women's FIFA World Cup trophies were at Boulevard City in Riyadh today, so it's starting to feel a lot more real, I think, for Saudi Arabia, this World Cup hosting. Obviously, a lot of work to go still until 2034, but yeah, all of these developments, I think, are positive for the football outlook in the kingdom.
I hope I see you at the 2034 World Cup. Mark Lomas, thank you very much.
I'll be there.
Great, me too. A reminder of our top stories. Ukraine says it struck the base of a Russian missile brigade it claims is behind the deadly attack on Sumy. Sudan's civil war enters its third year as aid agencies say it caused the worst world humanitarian crisis. And the retrial of the disgraced movie mogul Harvey Weinstein begins in New York City today. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. Counterpoints with Melinda New Sephora, that's coming up next, followed by a conversation with Dr. John Golden discussing children's psychology. Then it's the Rail Deal with Tom Burgess-Watson. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye.